there's another model that I really want to bring to light, which affects the Planet X model, the traditional model. When this model was originally presented by Zecharia Sitchin, it was put forth as an idea that showed a static solar system. Basically, our sun not moving. It's just a sun stagnant in space with all the planets rotating around that. There's been a lot of new data to challenge the theory that our solar system is actually moving. If you think about our sun not being static and actually having a course that it's traversing, perhaps even another sun, meaning if we have two suns, they'd be in orbit around each other. So all of our planets in our solar system traveling around the sun, while the sun is in orbit, they too are in motion. That's a whole other idea of looking at our solar system as a non-static model, and it changes the dynamic properties for how the constellations move and how we see them. Traditionally, the topic known as precession. So we're going to dive into that, and really what I'm going to focus on is some of the more esoteric aspects of this lost cycle of time, because it seems to correlate with a rise and fall of civilizations here on Earth. So we've all heard of some of these terms, like the Dark Ages. There was a point in time when man was not very spiritually awake and was more interested in more just the physical aspects, excuse me, of gaining wealth and power and land and conquering. And as we slowly moved out of those dark ages, there is also this understanding of the golden age. And so if we look much further back in our cycles of time, at a time, let's say 10,000 years ago, you can see evidence in ancient records from Hindu texts that speak of a time when man was actually able to interpret God. So all the evidence points to a fact of not a linear timeline. Man was a Neanderthal and has been evolving ever since. No, there seems to be a cyclical knowledge to our evolution, that man goes through cycles of evolution, and it's possibly caused by a larger, grander cycle of cosmic experiences that are driven by this, what we call the lost cycle of time, but modern terms call it precession of the equinox. Excuse me, little frog in my throat. So a new model suggests the idea that our sun is not alone. It's not just a solar, one sun sitting there stagnant in space, but it's actually a binary solar system. Now we say this because most of the other suns that we've imaged, most of the other external solar systems with Kepler and Hubble and other telescopes, we see that they're actually binary, sometimes having even more than two suns. So it stands to great reason that our own solar system is in fact binary as well. Now, there's quite a bit of evidence in ancient knowledge that actually depicts man trying to ascend to the heavens, and actually a knowledge of twin suns. Here's a famous Babylonian artifact that discusses a time when man was trying to build a stairway to the heavens, and at the top placing a Shem, a rocket ship, to actually launch into space. And you can see here that at the top where their Shem is, right above that, there are two suns. And here's an actual color relief of that statue. So very interesting that going back to even 3800 BC to ancient Sumer, the knowledge that they reflected was of a solar system that had two suns. Now, again, if you think about this from the traditional model of our planets just rotating around the sun, it's rather boring and outdated, because a lot of the new data shows us this is in fact not the case. Most of the evidence is showing us, again, with a binary system, that the suns in fact are moving through space on their own orbit, their own dance. So this changes the whole dynamic of a solar system if you think about this instead. If the sun is traveling through space on an orbit around, let's say, another sun or another body, that means all of our planets, including the Earth, are moving through space in a three-dimensional path. And this is what changes the aspect ratios of how we see the constellations change over this very long cycle of time. It's actually 24,000 years that the ancients were tracking precession of the equinox, where every 2,000 years we move into a new constellation. And they track this through a very large cycle of time known as the 12 houses of the Zodiac. So we just entered the new age of Aquarius, crossing over into that new time zone. So again, these are all astronomical markers that are being tracked. And we have a new awareness of how the ancients looked at this knowledge, with understanding that our sun is traveling through space, most likely, in an orbital dance with a binary companion. Now, this changes the whole traditional model of precession of the equinox. At the foundation of how the ancients tracked this larger cycle of time lies the 12 houses of the Zodiac. Modern man has tried to decipher and apply mathematical algorithms and observations to this precession, this timetable, and trying to understand it in the limited amount of time that we've been here, and only just, a couple thousand years or a few thousand years, depending on how far you want to go back. And so the ancients used the 12 houses of the Zodiac as markers to denote what time they were actually in, what age they were actually in. And this was a very complex topic because it allowed ancient man to realize where they were in this grand cycle of time. And knowing that gave them a foundation of knowledge as to what to expect. There appears to be, because of the movements of having two suns in orbit around each other, there appears to be an effect given on humanity and to just life across the globe around the nature of energy that we get from the sun. So if you think about this just from our what we understand today, think about summertime, going outside at the peak of at noon when the sun is out. All the animals are alive and chirping and running around. All the flowers are pointed up at the sun and gaining nutrients. That sun literally controls many aspects of our life. We don't even realize the fact that because of the sun, when the sun sets and it gets dark, you go into a subconscious state of sleepiness for about 8 hours. Why does that happen? Because the sun sets and it gets dark. And we're now used to that cyclical rotation. Well, there's another effect, which is the earth is traveling around the sun, right? And so it takes essentially 1 year for the earth to travel around the sun. Well, what happens in a year? Seasons change, temperatures drop and rise. Freaking animals migrate to different continents. All of that is caused by us orbiting the sun, all right? So if you think about the day and night affecting our subconscious, making you sleepy, the orbit around the sun affecting migration animals and climates and actual weather patterns, the ancients say that there's a third cycle as well, a 24,000-year cycle, which is us orbiting in this great long precession cycle of completing a 24,000-year cycle. So somehow they were aware and tracked and knew that as we were coming into a golden age, which is as the suns get to their closest point, something awakens in humanity. We exponentially open up and learn faster. But then as the suns get to their farthest point, we go into like a sleepy state and forget everything. It's kind of like the dark ages. So there's this rise and fall of knowledge that seems to happen as a rise and fall of civilizations traverse this large cycle of time. So knowing how we were traversing these various time periods allowed the ancients to kind of level set. Are we going into another dark age and losing knowledge? Are we coming out of a dark age and are about to have a grand awakening like we are now? So understanding this 24,000-year orbit caused by two suns, not just one, but two suns in an orbit. And as they get close to each other, they speed up and then slow down, speed up and then slow down. And the average mean of their orbit is around 24,000 years. And so if you figure each constellation, each house of the Zodiac lasts for about 2,000 years, meaning the time of Jesus, his time was around 2,000 years that he reigned. Now that it's the end of the age of Pisces, right? We've now entered the age of Aquarius. You can literally see since 2012 an awareness awakening. Shows like Ancient Aliens and others gaining way more popularity. So there is literally a subconscious and physical effect to the orbit of these two suns, our sun being in an orbit in this grand dance. So when the suns are at their closest point, it seems to be that we're in an awakening and knowledge just streams in. When the suns are at their farthest point, we're at the dark ages. We lose all this knowledge, and it's a reawakening over thousands of years for us to reconnect with this information. So, there's been other scientists that have studied the planetary effects on gravity, on solar cycles, and how they actually affect us on Earth. And this gentleman, Alexander Chavinsky, looked at solar cycles and realized that the cosmological variables actually helped and were proponents of having the ability to have better health, or when we were more likely to go at war with each other. So basically, he looked at the times when the sun was more magnetically charged and shot off all these bolts of radiation that affected us, like it does today with our satellites and other things. But he proposed that it actually affect our consciousness. So very heavy topics that have been studied and theorized that there's actual cosmic energies that affect the rise and fall of civilizations, that affect the consciousness at a whole scale on Earth. Now, a business partner of mine and great friend named Walter Cruttenden actually has, looked into these topics as well and dubbed it, the name The Great Year, same as some of the ancients that have looked at this timetable. The Greeks, the Romans, all understood that there was a larger cycle of time, the Great Year, and they gave it a pronounced understanding and relevance to try and understand their own position of this knowledge. Walter did a great job in documenting this information, and it's actually hosted by the voice of Darth Vader, James Earl Jones, that takes you through this 1-hour presentation and gives you the nuances of understanding that the cyclical knowledge has been passing through various evolutionary states of our existence up until now, and is probably a guiding light for us to look to the future. Now, what's really interesting is that all the ancient cultures kind of documented this ancient astronomical data and gave us the hidden knowledge embedded into their artwork and artifacts to try and explain some of this esoteric knowledge, especially around where the pharaohs go, where is their returning place in the heavens, or understanding where the gods are coming from. So throughout some Semitic languages, like, the ancient Near East, Iraq, Iran, even going back thousands of years into Mesopotamia, Babylon, and Sumer, Egypt, we see similar veins of information around the power of flight and understanding and preparation for pharaohs or kings to have this journey into the sky, into specific points of the sky, specific coordinates as well. So one has to wonder if there isn't ancient knowledge for us to unlock still about this great question about where do we come from, or even at the soul level after death, where do we go? How is this whole process actually taking place? It appears that the pharaohs of ancient Egypt and other cultures like the Incas, Mayans, they prepared their kings with great knowledge as to traverse questions and certain beings that with the right knowledge, armed with the right knowledge in the afterlife, they could ascend back into kingship. There's an 800-page book by the Egyptians called the Book of the Dead, again, translating and looking to how the pharaoh's preparation to maintain kingship in the afterlife was quite an arduous task, even in his current life. That sounds like knowledge we should probably look into. Maybe there's ways to extend humanity in our own life or existence, or track understandings beyond what happens in this current life cycle. So where I've focused is, again, the astronomical information, because that's something we can translate. And in some of these aspects, like this wall relief actually on the ceiling in a crypt in Dendera, the Egyptians have laid out like constellations that you can see from the naked eye and make them out. The kicker is they're depicting of what the sky looks like 8,000 years ago, accurately. Now, that means that the Egyptian culture is much older than we attribute it to, or they were able to use precise astronomical models to roll back the time based on current observations and make accurate assessments to where constellations would have been. Most likely this was direct observation, in my opinion, and this is knowledge that's been handed down as sacred knowledge. Now you can see here's an actual high-res version of this on the ceiling, so it's extremely detailed, and it shows all of the constellations in various areas of the solar system that we know of, but again, from a pulled-out perspective with a much more broader view and from a much more ancient lens over 8,000 years ago. Now, we again see this type of esoteric knowledge shared from other cultures. The Mayans and the Aztecs had a very, very advanced calendar, had a system of calendars, actually. You know, the whole idea of 2012 and the idea that the Mayans were tracking the end of time because their calendar was so accurate, again, was a misunderstanding. You know, they had various calendars that, yes, were very accurate mathematically as well as astronomically. But one of those calendars was a prediction-based calendar where they were able to make predictions using a system called Baktunes, where they could tell you during certain periods of time what events would unfold. Some of those events actually were predicted to be quite on point. And so one of those predicted events was the return of their god, Kukulkan, said to have come at a certain time. That time frame overlapped with the arrival of the conquistadors. When the Spaniards and the conquistadors showed up on the shores of the ancient Mayan villages, they thought it was Kukulkan returning in exact time frame of when he was predicted to return. So what did they do? They showered the Spaniards with wealth of their gold, of their culture, of their knowledge. And what did the conquistadors do? They burned and destroyed all of their codices, all of their knowledge, except for 3 that remain, and aggressively converted them all to Christianity. Probably because they were scared of the knowledge they had. The knowledge depicted in these codices allowed them, as I said, very accurately to depict events that were to unfold and things that had already happened. And so this probably scared a lot of the Spaniard priests, and they were saying, you know, this is heresy, let's destroy all this knowledge, where today we can now see that this was extremely sacred knowledge and was way more advanced than what the Spaniards' understandings of astronomy were at the time. So, you know, unfortunately, those prediction calendars weren't always right. You know, the conquistadors showed up instead of Kukulkan and aggressively converted them all to Christianity. So lessons learned as we look to the past and understanding that sacred knowledge does exist, but there are nuances to it as well. Again, just showing that the calendar system that the Mayans was based on this 13-month rolling system that allowed you to very accurately pinpoint days of the month. Now, around the globe, there were, of course, other systems of measurement to be aware of this grand cycle of time. This one was actually found in Egypt as a very primitive marker system that, because of the shadow, right, like a time clock, would allow you to track time. And it was shown to be, you know, in use thousands of years ago. Other sites, again, formulating these semi-rigid, semicircular areas that, based on the movements of the shadows, allowed them to predict cyclical events, yearly events, even things such as when to plant crops, when the rains were going to come. All of this knowledge was extremely important to ancient sites and ancient cultures. Now, again, it was interwoven with some of this, call it sacred knowledge of ascension into the afterlife, where the pharaoh is always being prepared in some type of a vessel or a ship. And I just find this extremely intriguing that I think we're missing a lost part of knowledge around the afterlife and understanding what actually happens at a soul level, where we come into a life, learn some stuff, and then exit this life. But there seems to be a cyclical knowledge to these events. Now, a lot of the astronomical knowledge is extremely advanced when tied and correlated to where the gods are coming from. What we're seeing is a theme across a lot of the ancient cultures without any grand scale understanding of technology, no advances in modern science. They're able to grasp concepts that have been passed down by thousands of years, either word of mouth or written on walls or through some type of a dance that actually describes modern cosmological data that we are just recently unlocking, right? So the whole idea that there's a star system near us, one of the, probably the closest one, the most likely candidate for there to be another planet around a star system, another sun, is Sirius A and B. And it turns out that some of these cultures, again, with no knowledge of math, no knowledge of astronomy, like the Dogon tribe, has been accurately depicting Sirius A and B for thousands of years and telling us that there's gods, the Nomu, that come there. They depict them as these water creatures, fishmen, and other cultures around the globe, even the Japanese Dagu or the Mesopotamian Dagon, or as I'm showing you here, the Dogon tribe, the dog star, all of these references of this dog kind of reference pinpoint a place where the gods are coming from, and these gods are amphibious. They seem to be almost water-based gods. Now, the Dogon tribe also spoke very accurately of the Orion constellation, like many other cultures, Egyptian, Aztec, Mayan, so Japan even. So we have to wonder what this means. The Dogon tribe in Africa to this day still remains in their traditional sense, leading the ways of their ancestors. And embedded in their knowledge is a knowledge of Sirius A and B being connected as to where their gods come from. And they actually have, left all kinds of depictions, like many other cultures, of Aboriginal origin, and say that there's beings that visited them in ancient times and departed ancient knowledge. The difference with the Dogon tribe is the accuracy in which they were able to say where these beings were coming from, specifically Sirius A and B. Now, this really raises a lot of questions about the Dogon tribe and understanding that their own knowledge of their lifespan, whether it be 100 years, let's say, is reflective of even what we have today. And so when we talk about this grand cycle of time, folks, a 24,000 year cycle is a very hard thing for us to comprehend when we only live about 120 years, right? So it's not easy for us to understand that there's a larger cycle of time that over thousands of years is affecting the rise and fall of civilization. But think of it this way. There are unseen forces, at play that we just don't understand. Here's a mayfly. Its whole existence on the planet is 24 hours. It literally is born and dies within 24 hours. So let's say a mayfly is born on a nice sunny day, and then it's sitting there, and another mayfly comes up and says, I've heard of this rumor of rain or wind or snow, but I haven't seen it. What do you think? The other mayfly is like, nah, it's a rumor. It doesn't exist. And they both die on that beautiful sunny day. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no rain or snow or wind. They just weren't alive in a long enough of a timetable to comprehend or understand it. And that seems to be the case with our very short lifespan. In ancient times, people like Noah and others lived 900 years. So there's something going on where we're currently, let's call it, coming out of the dark ages, a darker time where we're disconnected from God, disconnected from the knowledge. And for us, it's very hard to comprehend how at some point we were connected. But again, the ancients are going to great lengths to try and convey that to us. And they left it in the form of artifacts that talk about various constellations, that give us information about what was happening during those time periods, or showing us that there was symbolic references to others, like this other planet where the Anunnaki come from. Over 6,000 years ago, 3800 BC, the ancient Sumerians went to great lengths documenting that there was another planet, Nibiru, where their gods, the Anunnaki, came and visited. And these Anunnaki very much align to all the biblical tales of giants upon the earth, a time when man lived amongst his living gods. A lot of these ancient tales in this very early version of writing, literally the first form of writing we find on earth, is called cuneiform script. It's interesting. We think we're advanced with our modern day 26-letter alphabet. Well, the first writing system on Earth had over 400 characters, cuneiform script. How is this possible? How were they taught this knowledge? They didn't just invent it. Now, they used this knowledge of cuneiform script to write it down on either clay tablets that they would fire up into stone, or they would carve it into semi-precious stone. So these texts would last the ages of time. We still have them today on museums across the world, the British Museum, the Louvre in Paris, various museums in Turkey. What's really interesting is that there's still thousands of these tablets not on display, not translated. They could hold the secrets of medical knowledge, of extending our life. Who knows? They definitely contain the knowledge of events that happened in ancient times between man and what they believed to be their gods. A lot of this knowledge, which I've been able to uncover using professional antiquities photographers going around the world, shows evidence that the Sumerian culture lived amongst and documented being with their living gods. And they depicted them as much larger beings, not only physically larger, but actually gave them the power of flight, showing them with this winged disc coming down from the skies. You know, if you translate the word heaven in every instance across the Bible in the King James Version to sky, it just talks about all these beings coming down from the sky. And that's a direct translation when you get into the more ancient versions in Hebrew or Akkadian or in Sumerian. So what I'm just mind blown by is that all the evidence is right around us, that for thousands of years, we've been visited by these beings that created us in their image and after their likeness. And they've been guiding us and teaching us. Now, what's really interesting is that throughout these depictions, these wall carvings in Iran and Iraq, you see a repeated scenario where the king is always up on high, on a mound, on a hill, or on top of a pyramid. And he is at that point able to have a relationship with the beings in the sky. A doorway opens. You can also see off to the right here, what looks like a doorway opening. So some systematic way that these beings appear and have the power of flight. And then below the platform, right, are the civilians holding up and doing the labor, creating these monuments and these amazing platforms so that the kings and the priests could continue to have these interactions with the gods. I call those little people down there the taxpayers. But it's a repeated event that we see over and over of the gods being greeted by these beings coming down in a winged disc. And this is cross-cultured information, this idea of putting wings to give a symbolic reference for the power of flight. And probably technology. If you look at this example of an ancient Sumerian god, an Anunnaki, you can see that symbolically he's holding the fruit of life, that cone in one hand, but he's also holding that purse in the other. And this is like a Mary Poppins magic bag. If you've ever seen the movie Mary Poppins, she could just pull out lamps and all kinds of amazing objects from her purse. It was like smaller dimensional space where she could create things just pulling it out of her bag. That's exactly what the ancient gods have been depicted as having, this magical bag where they could just manifest and pull things out of. The ancients didn't know how else to explain it other than to depict it that way. Notice that he's also wearing what looks like a wristwatch. Again, references parallel to modern technology. Now, 6,000 years from now, are they going to look at this and say, well, were they landing birds on the moon? What were they doing? No. Same thing that they were doing in ancient times, is depicting man as saying that they had the power of flight. Sorry about that. Doesn't want to load. There we go. So depicting them with wings is the same thing we're doing, is saying we have the power of flight. We're not landing birds on the moon. It's a symbolic reference. Same thing that they were depicting to us 6,000 years ago. Now, you know, we have the evidence that shows us the Sumerians, they had astronomer priests that kept this knowledge, handed it down over hundreds, even thousands of years as sacred knowledge, where they observed the heavens. They could tell you 50 years in advance on what specific day there would be a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. You guys all saw the movie with Mel Gibson, Apocalypto, where they're all taking the slaves to the top of the pyramid and chopping off their heads as sacrifice. But there's one point in the movie where the priest looks over at the king right before the eclipse and tells him the eclipse is about to happen. And it's the priests that have that knowledge, not the kings. The astronomer priests have been tracking astronomical events for thousands of years because in the past, there are literal tablets like this that speak of a priest. An Anunnaki would sit down with one of these Anunnaki. A Sumerian would sit down with one of these Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki would give him knowledge, and the priest would record this, usually with another scribe, someone who could read and write cuneiform script. The priest would dictate to the scribe what to write down. The Venus will appear on this certain day. And so they recorded all this knowledge, this sacred information, and passed it down over thousands of years. Now, we've all heard of the understandings that, in the modern biblical tale, God built everything in 7 days, right? The 7 days of creation. Well, there are actual 7 tablets of creation from a much larger epic called the Enuma Elish, which describes how actually everything was fabricated. There's an even more grander tale which describes how life started on Earth, even before humanity, how the planets coalesced and became solid objects. So a lot of this information being recorded, ancient scholars in the early 1900s didn't understand this and left it in piles to be future translated. But what you can see here again are these depictions of all the kings with Nibiru, a glowing star in the sky, gods being depicted coming from that star and coming down and giving us knowledge. You can see here that here's a land scene that it's daytime. The sun is out. They're plowing the field with their animals, yet they're shading their eyes. They're looking up and seeing that there's a glowing cross in the sky to denote a time of Nibiru, a red glowing cross being near, and them understanding that was a time of the crossing, of when the gods would be close by. Seeing this planet was a sign of great change for them. And they use this symbolically as a reference throughout other cultures as the winged disc. And so the Sumerians left us quite a few artifacts that depict this symbol of Nibiru, a glowing cross, and its crescent moon. Here's an actual artifact that shows the 7 dots of Earth and our crescent moon, and then Nibiru, a cross with its moon. So, what's really interesting is a lot of the knowledge that depicts the creation of Earth speaks of Earth even before it was Earth. It was once called Tiamat, and there was this great collision with one of the moons of Nibiru, and in that striking caused this great collision. It strewed out what we know as the asteroid belt and mixed the waters of Nibiru and Earth, seeding us with life. All of this is told in much more condensed tales in the Epic of Creation we find in the Sumerian and Akkadian versions. Now, a scholar named Zachariah Sitchin did a very good job of again, translating the Sumerian knowledge into English understandings that we can grasp. Basically, the knowledge speaks of a great collision that took place. The ancient planet X, known to the ancients as Nibiru, was basically a rogue planet, and it got attracted to our solar system by the gravitational pull of the outer planets, and at some point had a collision with some of the inner planets. And so what you can see here is that, and I'm sorry that it's a little carved up or hidden, but what this shows is Nibiru being pulled in by these outer planets, being pulled into the inner part of the solar system, where then this collision takes place. And Nibiru, or Planet X, the main moon, north wind, hits Earth so hard that it literally cracks it in half, strewing out the asteroid belt, pushing Earth, which was then called Tiamat, now Earth, pushing it into a new position where it's now sat for billions of years. What's interesting now is that we have astronomical data to show that the orbit of Nibiru is around 3,600 years. It takes 3,600 years for Nibiru to complete one orbit around our sun because it goes so far out and most likely is looping around another sun. That's why it loops back. Many people ask, well, why is it just flinging out into space and what's sending it back? Looping back to the beginning of my presentation, folks. were a binary system. The Planet X model that Zecharia Sitchin presented was a non-binary system. If you consider that we're a binary solar system, Planet X wraps back around our second sun and heads back into the inner solar system. And this happens every 3,600 years. There's enough distance between Mars and Jupiter, where the asteroid belt is, for another planet to have once existed, yet now all we have is the asteroid belt. So the Sumerians have left us all kinds of hints and knowledge about this information. I mean, this is a tablet from 4500 BC. It's one of the oldest that we have from their culture. Yet what does it show? The sun in the center. All the planets that we know of in their correct size and position. Since the time of Galileo and Copernicus, we thought that we were the center, right? All the planets orbited Earth. No, the Sumerians had it right even thousands of years ago. So another aspect of this that's interesting is that, all the knowledge that they said they had, they said they were given by the Anunnaki. If you ask the Sumerian, well, how do you know all this? They say, well, everything we know, we were taught by the Anunnaki. And so one of the things they said is that Earth is called Ki, the seventh planet, not the third rock from the sun like the TV show. They called Earth the seventh planet because if you're coming from the outside in, you pass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Earth is the seventh planet. So very interesting information when we look at, just artistically, the fact that I still consider Pluto a planet, so I don't care about what they're trying to do to demote it. That's ridiculous. With the known model that we have, the ancients uphold it as well, were 9 planets. Plus, they also counted our sun, our moon, and then its additional planet, Nibiru, as the 12th member of our solar system. So Zecharia Sitchin actually found quite a bit of information that, really would raise the hairs of scholars on the back of their neck trying to understand, how to interpret this. What you're looking at here basically shows information that along the edges, now first of all, they didn't even give credit to the idea that ancient man had the idea of a circle, that they were using the wheel. Well, here's a circular tablet. But on that tablet, around the edges, was some very key information. And Zecharia Sitchin pointed out that right along the edges here, it actually said things like mountain, pile up, high, 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 rocket, rocket, rocket. He believes that this is information where the Anunnaki explained to the Sumerians how they had to pass by 6 planets before making a course correction to land on Earth. So it's literally showing the mountainous planet Nibiru, and then the 6 planets they had to pass by before landing at the 7th planet Earth. So again, really interesting information when we think about the astronomical data of a tablet that's thousands of years old, saying things like rocket, 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 mountain, pile up, high, 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 and showing actual coordinates of how they course corrected through space. So, again, a lot of this knowledge about ancient Nibiru and its main moon whacking our primitive Earth and causing us to be half a planet really resonates with Earth known cosmology. If you think about it, Earth is half a planet, right? Because of Pangea, we know that at one point, Earth was literally just one landmass. All the continents fit together. And if that's the case, if you siphon off all the water, we're talking about a half a planet. So, need a sip of water. It's really interesting that Sumerian cosmology fits modern science to explain this idea that, when you wrap the planet into a map, all the continents fit together as one landmass, supporting the idea of Pangea, which again is right in alignment with this grand collision spewing off part of the planet where we were just left with a half planet Earth. Now, again, what we also have is ancient evidence in the form of maps that actually show a time. You can see this map shows both poles where the land masses were still connected and what type of cultures and animals existed around those land masses. Now, for a map like this to even exist, it raises a lot of questions. Who in ancient times would be able to fly above the surface of the earth to map at this level of detail? I'm going to get back to this one in a minute. There was another map called the Phineas map also that showed the Antarctic poles of just the land continent accurately depicted underneath the ice. You got to imagine, folks, that to show these coastal lines of the landmass accurately, they're covered by at least a mile thick layer of ice. How could they see through the ice? How could they know the land from the ice and map that topography accurately? It raises a lot of questions. Well, the main question is understanding that these great floods, the idea that something in the past caused a global flood, a great flood, is actually an artifact that exists in the British Museum. Now, like Noah of the Hebrew Bible, there is a Sumerian version, much earlier than the English version, that talks of a great flood and how a Sumerian man is guided by the Anunnaki to build a craft and take all of the local people and local animals and plants because there's going to be this great flood. And what's really interesting is that, when modern archaeologists in the early 1900s first uncovered this artifact, there's a gentleman, assistant curator at the British Museum named George Smith. He literally freaked out. Oh my God, because word for word, it's authenticating the biblical story of Noah's Ark in an Akkadian version, which is even earlier than Hebrew. So this really started to raise a lot of questions, folks, for modern scholars, including myself, looking at the ancient knowledge to say, well, holy shit, there's got to be this ancient Nibiru. It most likely exists. And if that is true, as a home world for where the Anunnaki exists, we should be looking for this planet. Where is Planet X? Let's start the hunt. So the modern search for Planet X understands that we're looking for an object on a very highly elliptical orbit. And most of the known astronomy at the time, in the early 80s, there were no known objects that had, oblong or egg-shaped or any orbits like this. They were all very circular in motion. So the first protoplanet to be imaged by Hubble, you can see that there's a little tiny planet at the bottom here. This is not our star. Little tiny planet orbiting another star. And again, it's in an oblong, egg-shaped orbit. And this just blew astronomers' minds, the idea that this could happen. And so many theories started to come out when looking at our own solar system and trying to figure out why all the planets are so weird in the way that they are. Why is Uranus tilted on its side? Why are Uranus and Neptune possibly dislodged moons that were once a part of Saturn's orbit? We just don't know. And so one of the theories is that some big planet just exploded in the inner part of the solar system. And that's why we see all these fragments and debris, on the surface of the moon and Mars and even our planet. But we still haven't been able to actually pinpoint if a planet exploded or was there some large event that took place, like two planets colliding into each other. So there's been many theories abound. And we've had telescopes in space now for a few decades looking for a greater understanding of objects that are floating out there. And what we've come to find are literal, like planet-sized objects that we didn't even know about that are floating out there in space, that they call them either brown dwarfs, that they could be the size of a sun, but it's a failed sun, no longer emitting heat. And so it's very hard for us to see. Or basically like a large floating ice ball, the size of a planet. But again, it's a dead planet, so it's very hard for us to pick it up. It's not emanating enough heat. But, when we look into the data that we've been getting from probes that we've been sending, Galileo, Voyager, I mean, folks, this is a scan from a 1983 Encyclopedia Britannica. And what it shows is an actual model of Pioneer 10 encountering a dead star and actually saying that there was another planet, a 10th planet, that was orbiting that dead star. Look at this, folks. This was in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, it's just lost knowledge that we're not paying attention to. But this is all the evidence that we have. We have picked up all the signals to show that there is another sun. There are other planets orbiting that sun. There was another theory named Nemesis, that a planet orbiting our second sun caused a bunch of debris from the Oort cloud, another asteroid belt way out there. And that debris comes flinging in, and that's what wiped out the dinosaurs. I think I might have some data on that in a minute here. But the whole idea that, here's again some money from another culture, France, that again is talking about the idea of a 10th planet, the idea of a very esoteric solar system. Zecharia Sitchin met with the lead astronomer of the Naval Observatory, in 1988, where he too had a model of a rogue planet that he explained that was causing all of the why Uranus is tilted, why Neptune and Pluto were possibly dislodged moons of Saturn, all of this turbulation, great stuff that was taking place to disrupt our solar system, matched the same model that Zecharia Sitchin had. And so looking at the plates from Dr. Harrington's work and comparing it and overlaying it with Zecharia Sitchin's model, both pointed to looking in the southern hemispheres, the southern part of the region of the sky, for where to locate Planet X. So we've been using a vast array of telescopes focusing on the southern field of vision in looking for signs of other planets, looking to try and identify, is there this lost star spoken by the ancients, but also something that's currently affecting the known poles and what they call perturbations, the poles on the current known planets, and not understanding where this gravity is coming from. There's like an unknown gravity, an unknown force that they can't account for. It's because there's a missing planet. So all the evidence from our telescopes, Sirius, Hubble, Kepler, is looking for and gaining further popularity, that there's lots of different objects in space that we should be aware of, from different sized suns to various masses of planets, all the way down to what you can see here is a Jupiter-sized gas object. So some of these are quite large in size. Here's our ground-based Keck interferometer that can focus two beams at one point and focus and get a three-dimensional image of something. So you've seen this all over the news, right? The idea that there's some far out peer, that we've been imaging something out there that they call a Planet X. Something is out there that revolves around the sun. All of this is collaborating and confirming the idea that there is an ancient Planet X, an ancient Sumerian Planet X. So, when we look at the Sitchin model, comparing it to the Robert Harrington NASA model, and see that overlaps, we have to understand that we need to dig deeper. Both of these models do not account for a non-static solar system. The whole idea that we're in a movement, that our sun is probably orbiting around another sun, and those two suns in orbit are causing our whole solar system to move. And that's what's changing our visual perspective every 2,000 years. So understanding the legacy of information from Zecharia Sitchin, the interactions that we had with the Anunnaki, their agenda, and possibly when they will return and their future agenda, but overlapping that with our modern science and our modern understandings. So there's also been quite a bit of fear in looking at what's out there in space and understanding that even the prediction extinction level events show that they happen on cyclical time periods. As I mentioned earlier, most likely the 10th planet, Nibiru, or other objects orbiting our twin binary sun, they dislodge objects from the Oort cloud and they send these debris into the inner part of the solar systems. Look what happened with Shoemaker-Levy 9. Now NASA said, oh, don't worry about it. Shoemaker-Levy 9 is not going to be anything of an impact when it hits Jupiter. Yeah, 9 fragments impacted Jupiter's surface, where those red dots can fit 4 to 8 Earths in each of those dots. So quite a bit of catastrophe can happen with outside debris coming in from the solar system. God forbid we have some type of, extinction level event, happen again. it is something that we should be aware of. And so one of these theories is the nemesis theory. As I mentioned, that looking through history, we can see that lots of debris have been raining down on the inner part of the solar system, most likely being dislodged from this other debris field that we have billions of miles beyond Pluto, called the Oort cloud, filled with asteroids and debris that periodically have stuff dislodged and sent to the inner part of the solar system where we're subject to get whacked. So what is really interesting, that we've learned is by deploying all these telescopes, we've very quickly realized the amount of other suns that exist. Okay, so what you see in these images, all those little bright dots, those are all other suns with most likely planets around them. Really quickly showing us that, there's a lot of neighbors nearby. So again, this was just some of the math showing how another 10th planet, how Dr. Mueller named it Nemesis, could have this orbit that affects various astronomical things, from the planet's rotation to other planets speeding up and slowing down. And he kind of described it that there was this Goldilocks zone between their orbits. I described that earlier in my presentation to say that if our two suns are rotating around each other, when they're at their farthest point, we're in the dark ages. But as they get closer together, they tend to speed up as we get closer to the golden age, and we have this quickening effect. It's very interesting. So again, there is this modern search for Planet X, and we've been looking for objects beyond Pluto and finding not only Pluto, but Sedna, Quoar, Zedna, all these planetoids where they quickly said, oh, wow, well, Pluto's not unique. Let's demote it because there's a bunch of other things just like it out here. Fail. This is only just to show us that there are other bodies floating in space, and that most likely a Planet X, described by the ancients as Nibiru, does exist, and it's only a matter of time before we can actually track its course. We do have the technology out there. I'm sorry that my face is covering up some of the images, but what it basically shows is that the amount of technological advancements that we've made, when we take an image of other galaxies even, we are able to see thousands of suns and little planets now at their core, which is a great opportunity for us to extend the possibility in learning that we're not alone. Actually, here's the image I wanted to show. Great. So visible light, that's what you see when we look at a galaxy. Under the SIRTIF, look at all the knowledge that is gained in seeing all of those infrared heat signatures within that galaxy as possible locations that we can explore for signs of life. Those are all heat patterns that are suns with most likely planets around them. And it's just about finding those ones that are in the Goldilocks zone, the right distance to keep the right temperature, have the right chemical makeup for us to have Earth too. Okay, now the last thing I want to focus in as I kind of wrap up my workshop today is I want to arm you with the knowledge as to understanding how to identify and look at these ancient sites, not through the traditional lens of science. When we look at some of these sites like ancient Egypt, we have to understand that the descriptions, all the ancient texts speak of a time when the pharaohs literally could walk down the bank of the pyramid and be right at the foot of the Nile. From the pyramid to the Nile in minutes and have a boat cruise. Today, if you look at the geological evidence that I'm showing you here, you can see as a map, the pyramids off to the left in the desert area, and where the Nile is today, where that yellow line is, the amount of, over on your right-hand screen, you can see where the Nile is kind of two rivers here. The amount of time that it's taken for the Nile to move thousands, to move that amount of distance away from the pyramids, again, is a geological time reference to see that most likely the pyramids and the time that they were actually right up against the Nile extends much further into history than we understand. Maybe not just a couple thousand years, but 10,000 years plus. Other cultures that we see around the globe in Mesoamerica, Bolivia, and other cultures there were also fascinated by living on or near the water. And now we can see from geological data that some of these sites, right, here's this ancient map, or excuse me, this ancient lake bed, and you can see cities like Machu Picchu in Cusco, they're right on the edge of where most likely this lake bed used to be. Lake Titicaca, you can see now, is receded to where it is. But think about thousands of years from when the time that Machu Picchu might have been right on the ancient shoreline of Lake Titicaca. Cusco, right on the ancient shoreline of Lake Titicaca. So we have these geological references to see ancient sites and how long it's taken for time for them to either move away from the Nile, move away from some of these water masses, and use that as also a geological marker to see that the time stamps are much greater in time than we currently understand. So Egypt obviously is a great lens in realizing that the great deserts of Egypt were covered by grass and running water at some time. Before the great floods, though, we even see geological evidence and astronomical evidence pointing to the fact that the pyramids literally line up as a terrestrial map to the Orion constellation. It's a geological marker as to show when and at what time they were built. And this, I'm sorry, folks, but this alignment that you see here, where the pyramids line up in the sky, well, that happens at 10,500 BC. So for the Egyptian culture to exist at 2500 BC, it doesn't align literally, because they've pinpointed, whether it be Dendera reliefs or how they've actually built the pyramids, they align to much, much earlier dates in time, which speak to the evidence that they are also much older cultures. So many of these systems around the globe that they were using in ancient times to measure the solstice, the summer and winter solstice, the changing of time, they did it very mathematically. They did it with the ability of precession and the ability to understand the movements of the heavens, which is something that we can still revisit and grasp and re-pick up this knowledge. So understanding a lot of these ancient sites, the way they were placed, gives us a knowledge to further identify objects in the future doing archaeological excavations and understanding the placement of these objects in relation to understanding how they were tracking astronomical movements. So what we end up with, folks, is a knowledge that at some point in the past, there were geodetic sites connected through some type of world energy grid, harnessing ancient knowledge, harnessing ancient energy. One of the theories that I think makes sense is that as we started to progress into the Dark Ages, in the Golden Age, there's this natural resonance, probably because the two suns at their closest point, caused this natural awakening within us. And as we separate and go further away from that, they probably realized through technological advances ways to keep that energy alive through as they went into the Ascension times, using a world energy grid to circulate this energy and keep positive energy across the globe as long as they could. We still don't know, but we do have references across the globe to these geodetic sites where there was great astronomical observations being made, as well as energy upwellings that still exist today. So this really is, I think, an interesting way for us to look at the Planet X model and understanding that there's a cyclical knowledge of time, and that the way the planets move actually gives us hints to a time when we were in the Dark Ages versus when we'll be in the next Golden Age. So I think that's the key part for us to really unlock, is an understanding for where we're headed in this new exponential growth of knowledge as we approach the next Golden Age, which unfortunately I have to say, folks, the precipice of this Golden Age won't happen based on the timetable of a 24,000 year cycle. If we just came out of the Dark Ages, we're now just in the Bronze Age. We've got about another 4 to 8,000 years before we're in the next Golden Age. So I think it's a very interesting thing for us to look at the markers, even how they built them, right? Kukulkan descending as a shadow of light, used as a marker to say when the gods would return or when they were here. So all around us is the evidence, And I'd encourage us to continue to be open-minded as we unlock more from the past and learn from our future.